The dust storms on Velthari never truly stopped. They came in waves across the red desert, covering everything in a fine orange powder that worked its way into every piece of equipment, every sealed container, every breathing filter. Dr. Taman had been working on this dig site for 3 years now, and he still found the stuff in his sleeping quarters every morning. He didn't mind. The discomfort was nothing compared to what they had found here. The ruins stretched for kilometers beneath the desert surface. Ancient buildings made of a strange black material that refused to age, refused to crack, refused to yield any of its secrets to modern scanning technology. The structures belonged to the precursors, a civilization that had vanished 12,000 years ago and left behind technology that still made no sense to anyone in the galaxy. Taman stood at the edge of the newest excavation pit, his silver scales catching the dim light of Velthari's distant sun. His compound eyes could see in spectrums that humans couldn't, which made him perfect for examining the intricate carvings that covered every surface of the ruins. But seeing them didn't mean understanding them. "Dr. Taman!" One of the junior researchers, a young creche named Sumin, scrambled up from the pit below. Her chitinous legs clicked against the metal ladder. "We found something. Something big." Taman followed her down into the excavation. The pit was 30 meters deep now, and the walls showed clear signs of artificial construction. At the bottom, a crowd of researchers had gathered around something that made Taman's hearts beat faster. A door, massive, perfectly preserved, covered in symbols. The door was 5 meters tall and made of the same black material as everything else in the ruins. But unlike the other structures they had found, this one was clearly meant to be opened. There was a panel next to it, smooth and dark, with what looked like a handprint pressed into its surface, and covering every centimeter of the door itself were symbols, thousands of them arranged in neat rows flowing across the surface like water. "It's a complete writing system," Nari said. She had arrived 2 months ago from the Theln Collective, one of the best linguists in the galaxy. Her people communicated through color changes in their skin, which made them naturally gifted at understanding complex languages. "I've never seen anything like it. It's not like any known precursor script." Taman moved closer to the door, studying the symbols. They were beautiful in their complexity, each one different yet somehow connected to the others. "Can you translate it?" Nari's skin flickered through several colors that Taman's translator rendered as uncertainty and frustration. "I've been trying for the past 6 hours, nothing. It doesn't match any known language database. It's not mathematical. It's not pictographic. It's something completely different." Over the next few weeks, more linguists arrived. The Galactic Archaeological Council sent their best people. They brought quantum computers that could process billions of potential translations per second. They compared the symbols to every known ancient language in the galaxy. They analyzed the mathematical relationships between the symbols. They tried everything. Nothing worked. The symbols remained stubbornly meaningless. Every translation attempt produced gibberish. The computers couldn't find any patterns that made sense. It was as if the language was designed to be untranslatable, which made no sense at all. Why would anyone create a written language that couldn't be read? Taman grew more frustrated as the months passed. The door clearly led to something important. The panel next to it seemed designed for interaction, possibly for speaking some kind of command. But without understanding the language, they were stuck. The council suggested using force to open the door. Taman refused. The precursors had built things that lasted 12,000 years without a scratch. Trying to break through would likely destroy whatever was inside. No, they needed to open it properly. They needed to read the language. After 8 months of failure, Taman made a decision he didn't like. He opened the project to researchers from less established species. The kind of academics who didn't have the prestigious backgrounds or the fancy credentials. The council protested, but Taman was desperate. That's how Hajun ended up on Velthari. The young human arrived on a transport ship with a dozen other newly accepted researchers. He was small by galactic standards, with dark hair and nervous eyes. His credentials listed him as a graduate student in comparative linguistics from Earth, a planet that most of the galaxy considered barely civilized. Humans had only been in space for a few generations. They had nothing to contribute to serious academic work. At least that's what everyone thought. Hajun spent his first week adjusting to the camp and staying quiet. He attended the briefings, studied the data, and kept to himself. The other researchers mostly ignored him. A human graduate student was the lowest possible rank in this expedition. On his 8th day, Taman gave a presentation in the main research tent. He projected images of the door's symbols onto a large screen, walking through all the failed translation attempts. Hajun sat in the back, taking notes on a worn tablet. Halfway through the presentation, Hajun stopped writing. He stared at the screen with a strange expression on his face. His eyes moved across the symbols, following them left to right, then down to the next row. He said quietly. Taman's antennae twitched. Did you have a question? Hajun looked startled, as if he hadn't realized he'd spoken out loud. Every head in the tent turned to look at him. His face turned red, which Taman had learned was a human sign of embarrassment. Sorry, it's nothing. It's stupid. Please share, Taman said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. Hajun stood up slowly. He walked closer to the screen, his eyes never leaving the symbols. This is going to sound crazy, but this looks like the stuff my grandmother used to write. The tent went completely silent. Nari's skin flashed bright red, a color that meant anger. Several researchers made sounds that their translators marked as laughter or scoffing. Your grandmother, Taman said slowly, wrote in a language that's 12,000 years old? No, I mean, she wrote in Old Korean, from Earth. But she used this really ancient dialect that she learned from her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother, going back forever. They lived in this tiny mountain village. She used to write me letters in it when I was a kid. Hajun pointed at a cluster of symbols. See this? This is really similar to how she would write certain words. Coincidence, Nari said flatly. Pattern recognition error. The human brain is known for seeing patterns that don't exist. But Taman was watching Hajun's face. The young human wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to make himself seem important. He looked genuinely confused, as if he couldn't understand why no one else saw what he was seeing. Can you read it? Taman asked. Maybe. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but... Hajun moved closer to the screen. His finger traced the air near one line of symbols. He frowned, concentrating. Then he opened his mouth and spoke. The sounds that came out were strange. They had the rhythm of human speech, but with tonal variations that seemed impossible for a human throat to make. Hajun stumbled over some of the sounds, clearly uncertain, but he kept going. He read an entire line of symbols, his voice growing more confident. The tent was completely silent when he finished. Then the ground shook. Everyone ran outside. In the excavation pit, impossible things were happening. The massive door was moving. Ancient mechanisms that hadn't worked in 12,000 years were grinding back to life. Dust and debris fell from the door's surface as it split down the middle, the two halves slowly pulling apart. Light spilled out from inside. Not the light of the sun, but something else. Something that had been waiting in the dark for thousands of years. Taman stared at the opening door, then back at Hajun. The young human looked just as shocked as everyone else. What did you say? Taman asked. Hajun swallowed hard. I think I said open for the children who remember. But I'm not really sure. My grandmother used to say things like that. Old prayers, maybe? The door finished opening with a final grinding sound. Inside was darkness and the promise of answers. Taman's mind was racing. A human. A graduate student from a backwater planet. Speaking words that his grandmother taught him. Words that opened a precursor vault. It was impossible. But it had just happened. The camp exploded into chaos. Researchers ran in every direction. Some toward the opening door, others toward their equipment, all of them shouting in a dozen different languages. Alarms blared as the safety systems detected the movement of the ancient structure. Taman tried to restore order, but even he couldn't stop staring at the doorway. The door had opened to reveal a corridor. The walls inside glowed with a soft blue light that had no visible source. The air that rushed out smelled strange, metallic, and sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. It was air that hadn't mixed with the outside world for 12,000 years. Nobody goes in yet, Taman ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. We need to run atmospheric tests. We need to check for structural stability. We need to figure out how that human did that, Nari interrupted. Her skin was flashing through color so quickly that the translator couldn't keep up. All eyes turned to Hajun. He stood frozen near the excavation pit's edge, looking like he wanted to disappear into the sand. His hands were shaking. I don't understand, Hajun said quietly. I read what I thought it said. Like reading my grandmother's letters. Taman approached him slowly, trying not to seem threatening. Your grandmother. Tell me about her. Tell me about this language she taught you. Over the next hour, while other researchers set up equipment around the open door, Hajun told his story. His grandmother's name was Minseo. She had raised him in a tiny village in the mountains of Korea on Earth. The village was old, so old that some of the families there claimed to have lived in the same place for thousands of years. They spoke Korean, but they also spoke something else, something they called the mountain tongue. She said it was a dying language, Hajun explained. Only the old people spoke it. Maybe 50 people in the whole world. She taught it to me because she didn't want it to disappear. She said it was important to remember where we came from. And she wrote in this language? Nari asked. She had calmed down enough that her skin showed steady colors of intense interest. Sometimes, she kept journals. She wrote me letters when I went away to university. I still have them. Hajun pulled out his tablet and opened a file. See, this is one of her letters. The image showed paper covered in symbols, hand-drawn, slightly messy, but unmistakably similar to the symbols on the precursor door. Not identical, but close enough that the relationship was obvious. Nari took the tablet with trembling hands. She stared at the image for a long time. Then she pulled up the photos of the door's symbols and placed them side by side with Minseo's writing. Her skin went pure white, a color that meant shock so deep that words failed. 93% match, she whispered. Accounting for stylistic variation and natural language evolution, 93%. The implications crashed into everyone at once. An Earth language. From a tiny village that most humans had never heard of, matching a precursor script that was 12,000 years old. It wasn't possible. It violated everything they knew about linguistics, archaeology, and galactic history. But the door was open. The evidence was right in front of them. Dr. Somin, the Kresh xenoanthropologist, clicked her mandibles together thoughtfully. We need to consider 3 possibilities, she said in her precise way. First, parallel linguistic evolution. Some languages develop similar patterns independently. Second, ancient contact. The precursors somehow visited Earth long ago and influenced human language development. Third, she paused and everyone waited. Third, humans are precursor descendants. No one spoke. The idea was too big, too strange. Humans were barely spacefaring. They came from a planet in an unremarkable star system. They had no ancient technology, no lost knowledge. Nothing that suggested they were related to the most advanced civilization in galactic history, except for this language. This impossible language. We need to go inside, Taman said finally. Whatever the truth is, the answers are in there. The next day, a small team entered the vault. Taman, Nari, Soman, Hajun, and 2 security officers. They wore environment suits and carried enough equipment to analyze everything they found. The corridor stretched ahead of them, glowing with that strange blue light. The walls were covered in more symbols. Thousands of them, millions of them, stretching away into the distance. Hajun walked slowly, his eyes moving across the text. Sometimes he would stop and read a passage out loud. His voice echoed in the corridor, speaking words that no one had spoken in 12,000 years. This part talks about a journey, he said at one point. Something about leaving home. Looking for, I think it says scattered children. The word isn't quite right, but that's close. Keep reading, Taman urged. They walked for an hour before reaching a chamber. It was massive, easily 100 meters across, and completely filled with a single object. A crystalline structure that looked like frozen light. Geometric and beautiful and utterly alien. It hummed softly, vibrating at a frequency just barely audible. A data storage system, Nari breathed. It has to be. This could contain everything. An entire civilization's knowledge. She approached it carefully, scanning it with her equipment. It's active. Still powered after all this time, but it's locked. There are multiple security layers, each one requiring linguistic input to unlock. Everyone looked at Hajun. Can you read them? Taman asked. Hajun moved closer to the crystalline structure. Symbols appeared on its surface, flowing like water. He studied them, his brow furrowed. Some of it. The first layer I think I can do, but there are parts that use words my grandmother never taught me. Or maybe words that don't exist in the mountain tongue anymore. It's like, imagine trying to read Shakespeare when you only know modern English. You get most of it, but some parts just don't make sense. Try what you can, Soman said gently. Hajun placed his hand on the crystal and began to speak. The words flowed from him, sometimes confident, sometimes hesitant. The crystal responded, lighting up with each correct phrase. Images began to appear inside it. Scenes of cities, of beings that looked almost but not quite like a dozen different species they knew, of starships departing from a dying world. The first layer unlocked with a sound like chimes. Information flooded out, projected into the air around them. Text, images, videos, data streams. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful. "This is their history," Nari whispered, her skin flickering with awe. "The precursors. They called themselves the Marunai. The word means something like those who carry home." The information showed a civilization at its height. Advanced technology, peaceful society, art and science flourishing together. And then disaster. Their star began to die, not slowly over billions of years, but quickly, a stellar anomaly that gave them only a few generations to evacuate. But they didn't just run. They planned. They seeded colony worlds across the galaxy, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and on each world they left more than just people. They left their language encoded into the genetics and cultures of each colony, and they left archives like this one. They wanted their descendants to find these places, Hajun said, reading from the flowing text. "They wanted us to remember, to come back together someday." "Us?" Taman asked. Hajun pointed to a passage. "It says here that they sent a colony to a small blue world in a quiet region of the galaxy. They called it, I don't know how to translate this exactly. New Root Place, maybe? They taught the colonists the old language and told them to keep it safe, to pass it down through the generations until someone needed it. The implications were staggering. Earth wasn't just visited by the precursors. It was colonized by them. And that colony had survived, had thrived, had eventually forgotten their origins, but not completely. In one tiny village in the Korean mountains, the language had been preserved, passed from grandmother to grandchild for thousands of years. Salman pulled up genetic data on her tablet. "I need to run some tests," she said. "If humans are precursor descendants, there should be biological markers, things that distinguish them from species that evolved naturally." Back at the camp, while Soman analyzed Hajun's DNA, the team studied the data from the first layer of the archive. It contained technical specifications, historical records, and astronomical charts. One chart showed the location of other archives scattered across the galaxy, dozens of them waiting to be found. But there was also a warning. The data spoke of something the precursors had seen coming, a wave of radiation from their dying star, traveling through subspace, moving slowly but inevitably toward inhabited regions of the galaxy. It would arrive in approximately 200 years. "They knew," Nari said softly. "They knew their death would spread. That's why they created the archives, not just to preserve their culture, but to warn their descendants." Somin emerged from her lab with results. Her whole body was trembling. "Hajun, I need you to contact your village. Everyone from there. Anyone who speaks the mountain tongue." "Why?" Hajun asked. "Because they're not entirely human. None of you are. You have genetic markers that don't exist in any other Earth population, markers that match residue we've found at other precursor sites." Her voice was shaking. "You're not just descended from the precursors. You're the most genetically pure population we've found. Your village, your people. You've been waiting there for 12,000 years, keeping the language alive, keeping the memory alive." Hajun sat down heavily. "My grandmother used to tell stories about ancestors who came from the stars, about old duties and old promises. I thought they were just stories." Taman made a decision. "We need to go to Earth. We need to find others who speak this language. The archive has more layers, and we need to unlock them all." The political fallout was immediate and explosive. Earth's governments panicked. Aliens coming to visit now? Humanity wasn't ready for official first contact. The UN called emergency sessions. News media went crazy. Conspiracy theorists claimed they'd known it all along. But Dr. Taman was insistent, and the Galactic Council backed him. This was too important. The fate of the galaxy might depend on unlocking those archives. Within 2 weeks, Taman, Nari, Soman, and Hajun were on a shuttle heading toward Earth's atmosphere. Their destination, a tiny village called Hwasan, hidden in the Korean mountains. A village where grandmothers still spoke the language of stars. "She's a natural teacher," Hyejin said one day, watching Young Suk work with a group of young researchers. "She's found her calling." The other elders thrived too. Banhua worked with engineers, translating technical specifications from the archive. His farmer's practical knowledge helped him understand complex systems in ways that academic researchers sometimes missed. Hijin worked on educational materials, creating standardized lessons for teaching the language. Daehyun spent hours in the archive recording its contents, his woodcarver's attention to detail ensuring nothing was missed. Jiwon worked with medical researchers, translating healing knowledge that could revolutionize galactic medicine. They were in their element. After lives spent in a small village doing simple work, they were now helping to save civilizations. But time was taking its toll. They were old, very old. The work was exhausting. Hajun watched them worry. He saw how Young-suk's hands shook when she wrote, how Banhwa needed longer rest periods between translation sessions, how Hyejin sometimes forgot words she'd known perfectly the day before. We need to work faster, he told Taemin one night. We need to record everything they know before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The expedition to find other archives intensified. Teams spread across the galaxy, using the coordinates from the Velthari archive. Each new vault they found added more pieces to the puzzle. More shield technology, more survival instructions, more warnings about the wave. Hajun led one such expedition 6 months after the elders arrived on Velthari. His team included Taemin, Nari, and Young-suk, who insisted on coming despite her age. I've seen one archive, she said through Hajun. I want to see another before I die. I want to know my ancestors left their mark across the stars. They traveled to a frozen moon called Kethral. The archive there was buried under kilometers of ice. It took weeks to drill down to it, and when they finally reached the vault door, Young-suk was exhausted from the journey. But she stood before the door and spoke the opening words. Her old voice cracked and wavered, but the words were perfect. The door opened, revealing a chamber much like the one on Velthari. Except this chamber wasn't empty. Stasis pods lined the walls, dozens of them, and in each pod was a Marunai, not ancient corpses, living beings perfectly preserved, their life signs showing as active on the scanning equipment. They're alive, Soman breathed. They've been asleep for 12,000 years, but they're alive. Young-suk approached the nearest pod. Inside was a being that looked almost human, but not quite. Taller, more angular features, skin that had a faint iridescent quality, but the resemblance was clear. This was what humans had descended from. We need to wake them, Taemin said. The process took days. The stasis systems were sophisticated beyond anything modern medicine understood. But gradually, carefully, they brought the sleepers back to consciousness. The first to wake was named Sulin. She was an archivist, a keeper of records. When her eyes opened and she saw the faces looking down at her, she smiled. She spoke. The words were pure Marunai, the original language without thousands of years of drift. Young-suk understood her perfectly and responded in kind. The two of them talked for a long time. Young-suk explained what had happened. 12,000 years of history compressed into a few hours. The fall of the Marunai, the survival of the colonies, the gradual forgetting, the rediscovery. Sulin wept when she learned that the language had survived, that descendants on distant worlds still spoke the mother tongue, that the plan had worked. We are the Watchers, she said through Hajun's translation. Every archive has a few of us. We sleep in cycles, waking every few centuries to maintain the vault and wait. Wait for the children to remember. Wait for the family to come home. More Watchers woke over the following days. Each one added to the story. They told of the last days of the Marunai civilization, the desperate evacuation, the careful planning of the colony program, the hope that someday their descendants would unite and survive the wave. You're not just descendants, Sulin told Young-suk. You're family. Blood of our blood. The same line that walked under our suns now walks under alien stars. We scattered the seeds and you grew into forests. The Watchers could read the deepest layers of the archives, layers that had remained locked even to the elders. They unlocked the complete shield specifications, the full instructions for building the protection that would save the galaxy. But more than that, they unlocked something else. Hope. The galaxy has changed, Sulin said. You have dozens of species now, thousands of cultures. You've grown beyond what we were. You've become something new, something better. She looked at the gathered researchers, at the different species working together, at the humans who carried Marunai blood, but were entirely their own people. We left you the tools to survive, she said. But you've built something more. You've built a family, Not by blood alone, but by choice. By working together. By caring for each other across the vast dark. Young-suk smiled. We did learn some things while you slept. The news spread fast. Living Marunai. The original people, preserved in stasis, now awake and ready to help. The unification project gained momentum. More archives were found. More watchers woke. Each one brought more knowledge, more hope. The galaxy began to unite in a way it never had before. Old enemies worked side by side. Resources were shared freely. The goal was clear: build the shields before the wave arrived. And at the center of it all were the speakers, the descendants who had kept the language alive. The bridge between past and future. They were the children who remembered, and they were bringing the family home. 2 years after the first vault opened on Velthari, the galaxy was a different place. Dr. Hajun stood at the viewport of the research vessel Remembrance, watching stars slide past as they traveled toward their next destination. He wasn't a graduate student anymore. He wasn't even Dr. Hajun, really. Most people in the galaxy now called him the first speaker, the human who had opened the first archive and started everything. He hated the title. It felt too grand, too important. He just read some symbols that looked like his grandmother's handwriting. That was all. But the galaxy needed symbols and stories, so he accepted the role. Behind him, the ship's common area was full of activity. Researchers from 30 different species worked at stations, studying data from the archives. Linguists practiced the mountain tongue in small groups, helping each other with the difficult tones. Engineers reviewed shield specifications for the 100th time, looking for ways to improve the designs. And in the corner, sitting in a comfortable chair with a blanket across her lap, Young-suk watched them all work. She was 100 years old now. Her body was failing slowly but surely, but her mind remained sharp and her voice still carried the old words perfectly. We're approaching Kethral, the ship's captain announced. Arrival in 30 minutes. This would be their 7th archive expedition. Each one revealed more pieces of the puzzle. Each one brought them closer to the complete picture of Marunai technology and knowledge. And each one hopefully contained more watchers who could help. The frozen moon of Kethral appeared ahead, a ball of white ice against the black of space. They'd found this archive months ago, but fully excavating it had taken time. Now they were returning to open it properly. Hajun made his way to Young-suk's chair. She smiled when she saw him approach. Ready for another adventure? He asked in the mountain tongue. Speaking it felt natural now, like breathing. Always, she replied, though I think this old body would prefer a warm beach to a frozen moon. We'll find you a beach when this is over. The warmest one in the galaxy. You'd better hurry then. Her smile was sad. I don't have many beaches left in me. They both knew it was true. Young-suk was dying, not from any specific illness, just from age. Her body had lasted a century and it was tired. The doctor said she had maybe 6 months, maybe less. The other elders from Hwasun village were gone. Banhwa had passed away 8 months ago, peacefully in his sleep after spending the day translating shield specifications. Hijin followed 3 months later, surrounded by the students she'd taught. Taehyun had lived to see the first completed planetary shield activated, then died the next day as if his purpose was fulfilled. Jiwon lasted until last month, still teaching medical knowledge to the very end. Young-suk was the last. The final elder from the village that had preserved the mountain tongue for 12,000 years. When she died, something would be lost that could never be recovered, but something would also remain. Thousands of people now spoke the language, not as well as Young-suk, not with her natural fluency, but well enough to read the archives, well enough to teach others. The mountain tongue would survive her death, changed and adapted but alive. The landing on Kethral was smooth. The excavation team had set up a full base around the archive entrance, complete with heated shelters and all the equipment they might need. The vault door was already exposed, waiting for someone who could speak the words. Young-suk insisted on walking to the door herself, refusing the floating chair they offered. Hajun walked beside her, ready to catch her if she stumbled. Timin, Nari, Soman, and a dozen other researchers followed behind. The door was magnificent, larger than the one on Velthari, covered in even more intricate symbols. The metal was frosted with ice, but underneath the black material was perfect and unmarred. Young-suk placed her hand on the door's surface. The ice melted at her touch and the symbols began to glow. She spoke the opening words, her voice clear and strong despite her frail body. The door opened slowly, releasing air that had been sealed for thousands of years. Inside, blue light illuminated a chamber that seemed to stretch forever. And like the last archive, this one had stasis pods. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. But this vault had something else. In the center of the chamber stood a different kind of structure. Not a crystalline archive, but a platform with a single chair. Above the chair, a complex device hung suspended in the air, humming softly. Sulin, one of the watchers from the previous archive, had come with them on this expedition. She stepped forward and examined the device with wide eyes. A cultural imprinter, she breathed. I thought these were all lost. What does it do? Hajun asked. It transfers knowledge directly into the mind. Not just facts, but understanding. Language, culture, memories. The Marunai use them for education. A child could learn years' worth of knowledge in hours. She turned to look at them. This one is configured for language transfer. It can teach someone to speak perfect Marunai. Perfect? Youngsuk asked. As perfect as you speak it? Yes, better than what centuries of oral tradition can preserve. This would give someone the language exactly as it was spoken 12,000 years ago. The implications were enormous. They'd been struggling to find enough speakers to unlock all the archives. But with this device, they could train hundreds of linguists in days instead of years. They could create a whole generation of speakers. Who do we use it on? Taemin asked. Everyone looked at Hajun. He felt his stomach clench. Me? You're the first speaker, Nari said gently. You're the one who started this. And you already speak the language better than anyone except Youngsuk and the Watchers. This would make you fluent. It would also let you teach others more effectively, Sulin added. Once you know the language perfectly, you can help us calibrate the device for others. You'd be the template. Hajun looked at Youngsuk. The old woman nodded slowly. You should do it, she said in the mountain tongue. Your grandmother would want you to. She preserved this language for you. Now you can preserve it for everyone. The process was strange. Hajun sat in the chair while the device lowered onto his head. It looked like a crown made of light, humming and warm against his skull. Sulin operated the controls while the other watchers they'd woken monitored his vital signs. This will feel unusual, Sulin warned. You'll experience memories that aren't yours. You'll hear voices speaking in perfect Marunai. Let them in. Don't resist. The device activated. Hajun's mind exploded with sound and meaning. He heard thousands of voices speaking, singing, arguing, teaching. He saw words written in styles from across Marunai history. He felt the language in ways he'd never imagined. Understanding its deepest patterns and most subtle nuances, he learned the technical vocabulary that hadn't survived in the mountain tongue. He learned poetry forms that had been lost. He learned the names of stars and concepts that had no translation into any modern language. And underneath it all, he felt the emotion. The love the Marunai had for their language. The desperate hope they'd felt as they fled their dying sun. The faith they'd had that their children would remember. When the device finally released him, tears were streaming down Hajun's face. He stood on shaking legs and looked at Youngsuk. He spoke to her in pure Marunai, the original tongue unfiltered by centuries of drift, and she understood him perfectly. It's beautiful, she said softly. That's what my grandmother was trying to teach me. That's what we lost. Not lost, Hajun said. Changed. Adapted. The mountain tongue is different from this, but it's not lesser. It's what happened when Marunai grew on Earth soil. It's our version. Our contribution, Youngsuk smiled. You're wiser than you used to be. The device transferred more than language. I have memories now. Not my memories. Echoes of Marunai who lived thousands of years ago. Teachers and poets and parents. They all put something of themselves into preserving the language. Over the following months, more people went through the imprinter. Researchers, diplomats, teachers. Each one emerged fluent in Marunai, able to read the deepest layers of any archive. The pace of the unification project accelerated dramatically. They found 38 more archives scattered across the galaxy. Each one was opened. Each one gave up its secrets. The shield technology became clearer and clearer. Engineers began constructing the first full-scale shields around major population centers, and more watchers woke. Hundreds of them, spread across dozens of archives. They joined Galactic Society, bringing with them knowledge and perspective from the height of Marunai civilization. But they didn't try to lead or take control. They were advisors, teachers, guides. They understood that this galaxy belonged to their descendants now. Earth changed dramatically. The planet that had been considered primitive was now recognized as one of the most important worlds in the galaxy. The UN reorganized, creating new departments to handle off-world relations. Hwasun Village became a historical site, protected and honored. But it wasn't a museum. People still lived there. Young families moved back, learning the mountain tongue from records and from the few remaining speakers. They planted gardens and raised children and kept traditions alive. The village grew instead of dying. Hajun visited when he could. He walked the same paths he'd walked as a child, but everything felt different now. The world had changed. He had changed. 5 years after opening the first archive, Young-suk died. She passed away in her sleep on Velthari, in a comfortable room overlooking the excavation site where everything had started. Hajun sat with her at the end, holding her hand and speaking to her in the mountain tongue. "You did it," he told her. "You kept the words alive. You saved the galaxy." "I just remembered what my grandmother taught me," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, not anyone, you," she smiled. "Tell my village that I saw the stars. Tell them that the old words matter. Tell them that grandmothers know important things even when they seem strange." Those were her last words. She died peacefully with Hajun still holding her hand. The funeral was the largest in galactic history. Representatives from hundreds of worlds came to honor her. They spoke in dozens of languages, but they all also spoke a few words in Marunai, the tongue that Young-suk had kept alive, the bridge between past and future. They buried her on Velthari near the first archive, a simple grave with a stone marker carved with her name in 3 languages. Korean, because that's what she was, Marunai, because that's what she carried, and Standard Galactic, because that's what she helped create. The work continued. The shields went up one by one, great constructs of exotic matter and technology, wrapping around worlds like protective bubbles. The galaxy united in a way that had never seemed possible before. Old enemies worked side by side. Resources flowed freely between species. The goal was simple: survive the wave. 20 years after Hajun read the first symbols, the shield network was complete. Every inhabited world, every space station, every colony was protected. The galaxy waited. Hajun was 45 years old now. No longer young, but not yet old. He'd spent half his life working on the unification project. He'd opened dozens of archives. He'd taught hundreds of students. He'd become one of the most fluent Marunai speakers alive, second only to the Watchers themselves. He stood on Velthari once more, at the excavation site where it all began. The desert wind still blew, still covered everything in orange dust. But now there was a city here. Research facilities, universities, museums. The archive had become the center of galactic culture and learning. Taman found him standing there, looking out over the valley. The old Velkari moved slower now, his scales duller with age, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "Thinking about the past?" Taman asked. "Thinking about grandmothers," Hajun replied. "About how my grandmother wrote me letters in an old language and it changed everything. About how Young-suk kept traditions alive in a small village and it saved the galaxy. About how sometimes the most important things are preserved by ordinary people doing ordinary things." "There was nothing ordinary about them," Taman said. "They were extraordinary. They just didn't know it. Maybe that's what makes it extraordinary. They didn't preserve the language because they thought it would save everyone. They did it because it was important to them, because it connected them to their ancestors, because forgetting felt wrong. And yet it did save everyone." Hajun nodded. "The Marunai were clever. They didn't just leave technology and information. They left it in a way that required us to remember where we came from, to honor our ancestors, to keep traditions alive. They made survival depend on memory." "Do you think the wave will come?" Taman asked. "The shields are ready, but it's still decades away." "Do you think they got the timing right?" "I don't know. Maybe it'll be sooner. Maybe later. Maybe it won't come at all." Hajun shrugged. "But it doesn't matter. The shields protect us from more than just radiation. They protect us from forgetting, from becoming isolated, from thinking we're alone." They stood in comfortable silence watching the sun set over the Velthari desert. In the distance, the archive glowed with its eternal blue light. Inside, students from 100 worlds studied Marunai language and culture. The past teaching the future, Your grandmother would be proud, Taman said. I hope so. I wish she could have seen this. Wish she could have known that her letters meant something. She knew they meant something. That's why she wrote them. Hajun thought about that. About Minseo sitting in her small house in Hwasun village, carefully writing symbols that she'd learned from her grandmother. Teaching them to a grandson who sometimes found them boring, who sometimes wanted to play instead of study. She'd never known about the Marunai. She'd never known that her language would unlock ancient vaults and save civilizations. She just knew it was important to remember. Important to pass down. Important to keep alive. And she'd been right. The galaxy had been saved by grandmothers, by teachers and farmers and woodcarvers and herbalists, by ordinary people in a small village doing what their ancestors had done for thousands of years, speaking the old words. Remembering. The mountain tongue lived on now, changed and adapted but alive. Millions of students learned it. It was taught in schools across the galaxy. Children on distant worlds spoke phrases that had first been spoken on Earth, in Korean mountains, by people who'd never imagined their words would travel to the stars. And somewhere in all those words and lessons and memories, the Marunai lived on too, not as they had been, but as something new, something that had grown from their seeds but become its own forest. The scattered children had come home, not to a place but to each other, a family united not by blood alone but by choice, by working together, by remembering that they were connected across the vast dark. Hajun visited his grandmother's grave when he returned to Earth. It was in the village cemetery, a simple stone with her name and dates. He sat beside it and spoke to her in the mountain tongue, telling her everything that had happened. You were right, grandmother, he said. The old words were important, more important than either of us knew. You saved the galaxy by teaching them to me. You saved everyone by refusing to let them die. The wind moved through the mountain trees, carrying the sound of village life. Children playing, families talking, life continuing as it had for thousands of years. But different now, changed by the knowledge that they were part of something bigger, that their language, their traditions, their memories mattered not just to them but to everyone. The children of stars finally remembering who they were, and the old words spoken once more bringing the family home.